While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, the host of the LEO First Podcast, and welcome to another amazing episode. I'm really looking forward to this episode simply because I met our guest only a few months ago, and what I quickly realized was that we're on the same trajectory when it comes to growth, building up law enforcement, and also finding different practical. And when I say practical, I want to make sure you understand that's what I mean. I don't mean theoretical or just something that we write in the books, but we're looking for practical solutions to build this industry. So because of that, when we talked about him coming onto the show, I already had an idea of what we were going to talk about. Now, you guys know this isn't scripted. I'm just going based on the feeling and the mood, but I kind of had an idea of some of the things I wanted to hit on based on some of the things he's been able to build up to this point. Without further ado, we welcome our guest today, who is Reuben Ramirez. Reuben, just go ahead and tell us about you a little bit. Just tell us something that you want the audience to know right away about you. Who is Reuben?
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, Michael, thank you for having me. My name is Reuben Ramirez. I'm an assistant chief with the Dallas Police Department. I'm currently the bureau chief over tactical and special ops for Dallas PD. I've been with the Dallas Police Department for 28 years. Actually, December will be 28 years. A number of different assignments throughout the years, but yeah, that's my role now. And I was tasked with looking into the state of wellness of our police department about a year and a half ago, and which obviously doesn't really mesh with the theme of special ops or tactical and special ops, but nonetheless, I was in a role that I was tasked with, and the journey to really understanding the things that our officers are carrying, some of the wounds and scars and memories that we hadn't really been able to ever really separate from, and probably even worse, just the strategies that we used to just kind of pack them deep down, way back, hoping that they would never come back up is what I learned, that really almost everyone in this agency, it's something that we all share, that we have in common, and it's obviously not healthy, and so this thing had really grabbed me. It's really it's taken a turn like something I never imagined, just as far as understanding the need and really needing to collaborate with other leaders within the department from all ranks, and really building something that can truly help the men and women who can protect and serve our communities every day.
Reuben, something you said early on, it kind of stuck in my brain. And you said you're assistant chief over the tactical side of the house, correct?
Correct. And
it's funny because you're right that when you see someone that has a very strong tactical background, it's not, that person's not always viewed as someone that's going to now take the mental wellness side of the house, or someone that's going to, what we used to look at more back as the soft skills or the touchy-feely stuff. But there was something in you that the chief saw. What do you think it was that had him assign this particular new division, the wellness side of it, to you?
Well, I think it was a combination of things. When he tasked me with this, it was right after an internal affairs hearing. It was a termination hearing with one of our officers, and it was something that we had continued to see in some of these internal affairs hearings. were officers that were involved in misconduct allegations. They were having a hearing, for their jobs, and we saw the same three themes that kept recurring. They were alcohol related incidents, they were anger related incidents, or they were incidents that had to do with some poor choice in relationship, to some degree, some whether domestic or boyfriend girlfriend situation. But
Correct.
And so, every time that we would listen to the officer, and then we would talk as an executive team and make our recommendations, I felt like there was something bigger happening in these hearings. I still have a hard time believing that a police officer who comes to this profession, usually, almost unanimously with the right intention, wanting to protect and serve, wanting to be a public servant, that somehow or another, they don't know. I had a hard time believing that they just didn't know that drinking and driving would lead to this, or that the relationship, that was dysfunctional might lead to this. So it seemed like there was something else happening there, and I voiced that a lot of times in those hearings. I just said, I just have a hard time believing that this is just, or that our officers don't know that they could get arrested for DWI, or that they want to be in these dysfunctional relationships, or that they're really that angry. And so, again, I think just some of the comments, some of the things that I would weigh in on in those hearings, I think that may have lent to him tasking me with it. I don't know. I mean, but again, it's just weird because it doesn't fit with the theme. It doesn't fit with my background quite.
Not at all.
But I'll tell you, man, it has got my heart now. This is something that I am completely, I'm neck deep in this thing, even to the point where I'm, presenting at conferences around the country now, just that ask me to, because I want to get the word out about what we've learned and what we built, this checkpoint model, and some of the results that we're seeing.
Yeah, and it's funny, like you said, I think what your chief saw and what I've seen is the passion to just make officers better. And there's more to the story than, like you said, alcoholism or anger or bad choices in relationship. There's other things going on that is sometimes hard to read, even because I used to do internal affairs myself as an investigator. And even from my perspective, there was always more than just what was written down. Whatever they were written up for, or whatever they, like in these cases, what they were arrested for, there's something that led to that. And what you saw past that, which was very important. And I think they have the right man for the job for that. One of the things that you brought up just now was something called checkpoints. What is checkpoints?
Right. So when we built our wellness unit, we got a lot of feedback. I did a lot of focus group conversations with a lot of my guys, a lot of special ops, SWAT team, tactical, undercovers. I met with investigators, patrol officers from all different watches, different tenure, and got a lot of feedback. And when some of those conversations were very heated, a lot of, really distrust in the department and our internal psych doctors. We have 4 doctors on staff here, and they're good doctors, but I think the distrust that I saw in those focus groups was more that the department would really do anything to truly change, or that they couldn't come. If they came forward to our internal docs that somehow there'd be some punitive response, that it would affect their job or cost them to lose their role or something else. So there wasn't a lot of trust there. So I knew that we had a bridge to if we were ever going to get where the department could provide something that our officers would really buy into. So because of that, because I know how much leadership exists inside of our police departments across the country, and I don't mean leadership by stars on their collar. I mean leadership by the true definition of it. Just the character, the moral compass, the integrity of the men and women who do this job. There's extreme examples of leadership in every agency in this country. I don't care if it's a 15-man agency or 15,000. And I know we have it here on DPD also. And so I talked with some of them at length about what, and it was really they were actually very vulnerable conversations. Like I said, what could we do? I don't know what to do, and I want to do something, but what could we do? And I remember this conversation so clearly. I was with some of my SWAT operators, and they said to me, they said, Chief, if you build this the way you're saying, something that will truly help people, no patting yourselves on the back, no celebrations, and look what I've done, no media. If you do it the way you're saying it, we'll do it. And I remember the one operator who said that. His name's Danny Canetti. He's just an excellent SWAT operator. Poor guy's been shot at like 4 times, but he's just a player. He's good. He's real good. And I remember, and then there was another guy in there, Derek Cheney, was one of our longtime homicide investigators, and again, just a great guy. And so I remember thinking, if I got guys like Derek Cheney in homicide, or if I got Danny Canetti in SWAT, if I get guys like this to buy into this program or to lead this thing for me, we could change something in Dallas PD. We could really get something done. And sure enough, I talked to each of them, and another guy, Joe King, on our department separately. There were 3 of them that I talked to initially. All 3 said they would do it. And eventually we built this program called Checkpoints, where we, officers like Joe King, Danny Canetti, and Derek Cheney, along with, now I've got 35 total checkpoint officers, but they proactively reach out to cops every time cops go to a loss of life call. And it's because we realize that, here's a piece I didn't mention, but just to give more context, when I was doing those focus group discussions, one of the things that kept coming up when we would talk about once we got past the hardened shell of what we hadn't done in the past and the distrust, but when we finally got beyond that and were able to have some dialogue, the things that kept coming up in our conversations about, what officers are carrying or what is really impacting them, what we heard repeatedly will surprise you. It wasn't things like, the danger of the job, right? It wasn't the fear of the job. It wasn't the shift work or bad sergeants or, late nights or callback. Those weren't the things they mentioned. The things that they mentioned were more emotional, type calls or type responses. Like they said stuff like this, that the sound of wailing mothers at homicide scenes, that came up a lot. They said those were things that really affected them. I heard stuff like, the contorted bodies at fatality car crashes. Officers went as far as saying that they never forget that intersection. They say that every time they drive there, they'll picture that vehicle, or they'll picture the body at a fatality car crash. And then they went as far as saying that, it sticks with you when your family member drives through there, or when your children finally start to drive. They talked about suicides and, just some of the, having to wait at these suicide scenes with family members for the medical examiner to get there. And, man, I had everything from homicide detectives saying that death notifications was the hardest part of their job, not anything else. SWAT operators that, talked about the hostage situations, losing a hostage, and how they second guess their progressions. And man, I mean, when you think about these things, right? Like this is not what mainstream America thinks is affecting cops.
Not at all.
But
yet, they think it's natural.
Right. And what's worse, when you really think about what we've done, or just kind of the model of American policing, we treat every one of those calls I just described, the fatality car crash, the suicides, the homicides, the death notifications, that is just what we call routine in American policing. And none of those calls are going to solicit any type of psychological services or any type of peer support or resources. These are just the things that we expect our cops to eat every single day and be okay. And because they're routine. And so if we as a department treat them as routine, how in the world can we ever expect our cops to come forward and say, hey, Chief, that routine call I went to is really
messing with me. Yeah,
you can't do that. And so we knew that the entire model, the entire structure is just, it's not designed right. If those are the calls, the routine calls are what are really like creating like the death of a thousand cuts for us, then, and those are the real culprits in our profession. But yet we haven't, first of all, we don't even really have a culture to help make cops feel like they can come forward in the first place, even in a critical incident, let alone a routine incident. So we decided that we were going to do something extremely different. We were going to build a model called checkpoints. And what checkpoints we're going to do was we were going to take some of the most influential people I had on the PD that I could find. And we were going to start reaching out and checking on cops when they go to those routine calls so that they don't have to come forward to us. We were going to come forward to them and we were going to check on them. And it was going to be very simple. Just, hey, man, Michael, hey, this is Reuben. Just want to check on you, Michael. I know you were at that fatality car crash, yesterday. Just want to check on you. Your response is naturally going to be, yeah, man, Reuben, I'm fine. And I'm going to say, okay, well, listen, I'm working with the wellness unit. We're doing checkpoints. Mm-hmm. We've got resources. We've got counselors that we found. They don't work for the department. They're out there in the public. We've got money to be able to pay for them. If you or someone needs it, man, let me know. I'll send you some names. And some of these counselors are really good. And that's it, man. That's a checkpoint. But we're doing hundreds of them now. Like we're doing 200 checkpoints a month.
Wow.
And the thing that we're seeing, yeah, it's been nuts, man. We started this thing last year. This thing has only been in existence for 13 months. We started it last year. We did 800 checkpoints last year. We had 11% of the officers that we checked on. That's 88 officers came forward and said, yeah, I'm interested in that, man. I may be interested in those resources. And so we had 88 officers, 11%, 88 officers came forward last year. And so I thought that was remarkable. So this year we doubled down and we said, we're going to have more checkpoint officers. We're going to check on more people. So we're averaging 200 checkpoints a month this year. So we're slated to do 2,400 checkpoints this year. And we've had an average of 14% of the officers we're reaching out to are just, they're receptive to the idea, or they're saying, yeah, I wouldn't mind, text me or send me some numbers. And so, yeah, the response I think so far has been, remarkable. I mean, the fact that, we're having these types of conversations that we weren't having before. That's a great point. People tell me this all the time. They say, Reuben, like, because there's people that will obviously, man, there's naysayers that will question everything we're doing. And I've had people tell me, Reuben, you can't prove that those 11% last year or the 14% this year are really going to counseling. You can't prove that they're actually getting services. And, and I guess in their defense, they're right. I can't prove that. But I tell you what I can prove. I can prove that 800 times last year and 200 times a month this year, I've got a empathetic, compassionate leader on this police department reaching out to most of the time a younger officer, because it's, a lot of our patrol officers are reaching out to. And they're infusing a conversation that is supportive, that is encouraging, that is really talking about, something that's vulnerable, sharing because they'll share their struggles too. They'll share the need for these kinds of programs if that officer asks. And we're infusing some really healthy conversations into this police department. And that absolutely will manifest into something. And we are normalizing the discussion about wellness like we've never done before. And that will manifest into something. And so for the people who say, well, you can't prove that people are going to counseling, what I can prove is that we're having a lot more positive, supportive conversations than we've ever had before. And that in itself, I think, is a success. And I'll tell you right now, man, because I've been saying this at some of the conferences I've been talking to, when I'm talking to the audience, and I think every police department in America needs to have a checkpoint program put in place. They don't cost anything, man. They're just, all you're doing is just kind of it's a little bit of a philosophical shift. Most places have peer support, which, I'm not a huge fan of peer support, because I think it just kind of waits for us to be in a crisis. It's like that broken fix mentality, and I don't think we need to be waiting for cops to be in a crisis anymore. I think we need to get out in front of the crisis, and a checkpoint program does that. And man, we're happy to help any agency that wants to see how we built ours. We'll ship them our policy, man. We'll do whatever. We need to start. We really need to take a serious swing at this emotional health, this wellness, this secondary trauma that our cops are absorbing, and do something different.
Yeah, it's interesting how officer wellness has really shifted. I would just say really in the last 18 months to 2 years, to be quite frank with you. I know as a professional speaker myself, a lot of my initial presentations in 22, late 22, even some of 23 was kind of geared towards leadership development, because that's what most, especially chiefs or sheriffs, that's what they look at. But what I'm finding out now is more people are shifting to that mental wellness side. And where I believe there was more naysayers about it in the past, I think that's starting to shift, because you're right. It's how do you measure that one conversation led to a positive outcome directly? It's hard to, like, it's like anything else that's like even verbal communication. How do you know the one time you say the wrong thing to somebody that it's going to lead to them doing X, Y, and Z? You really don't. But that doesn't mean you can't have positive cultures created through, follow up and just reaching out. Like that is an area of every culture that can improve. And we all know, we always hear, oh, that place has a positive culture. But you start looking at all the little things that they do. For example, like having checkpoints. That does increase like everything you have going on. So the fact that you guys have got that going on at Dallas, I think it's important. And while I don't know how measurable it will be right away, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the results, because we're now realizing that those routine, and if I had my camera on, you could see me doing the buddy quotes or the quotes with my fingers. The routine calls, when it comes to your psyche, isn't really routine. But none of our brains are built just to see a death consistently, or go to some of these violent calls where people are getting shot or stabbed, or, everything that back in the day, especially when you say you've been doing it for 20 plus years, that was like, okay, this is a normal call. What's next? Like, that's not normal. Yeah. I mean, and now we're starting to see that shift. Like, okay, we're recognizing that people are having all these issues. It's because we're realizing that our brains aren't well. So how do we fix that? We try to address it earlier and often, and to let people know there's resources out there and having outlets. I mean, that's what led me to starting my own mental wellness journey, into building myself up and then realizing where we lacked as well. So with all of that, and what you do now with that. Now, you said you speak at conferences, and I know one of the conferences you were at recently was Noble, based on what we talked about in the green room. How was their reception, like as an audience, like to hearing this kind of information about checkpoints?
Man, I think they are so bought in by the end of the presentation. Like, they are almost unanimously in agreement that this is a part of the approach to officer wellness that has been missing. Particularly we've had a culture for as long as we've had policing that we know is not necessarily willing to come forward and ask for help out of fear of some sort of punitive response or fear of looking weak. And so why have we just sat back and tried to encourage them to come forward? Like, we still say that, and this checkpoint program doesn't. We're not waiting for cops to come forward anymore. We're going to go check on them. And that's just kind of seems like a no-brainer, I think. And hopefully your listeners are going to think the same thing when they hear this. Why have we up to this point taken the approach of, well, let's just, let's try to encourage our cops to come forward, instead of us proactively reaching out and taking almost that responsibility away from them, and at least till we shift culture. So yeah, so to your question, I think they're incredibly receptive to it. I think they're almost unanimously saying, like, man, we need this, and they want to implement it in their agencies. Now, whether they actually do implement it or not is probably that's yet to be seen. That's a whole nother hurdle that we may have to do on a different show. But I think that's probably the big problem, is that we are creating enough awareness now. Like you said, over the last 18 months or so, there's been more and more awareness brought to this, and that's great. But that doesn't mean that the departments or agencies know what to do about it, or that they're going to do something about it. We got to make sure that we get to where the rubber meets the road here, and actually put something in place that truly does bring some sort of support to our men and women.
Yeah, and it's a process. I mean, we all know that's how life goes. And as I mentioned before the show started, this particular episode is going to air the second week of August. But it was funny. Actually, let me take that. It wasn't funny. It was more timing that something recently happened in law enforcement to a high-ranking official. And as we kind of talked about it, as I looked into a little bit more as well, what it showed me was that it doesn't matter what your rank is when it comes to mental wellness. Just because you have multiple stars, an eagle, a bird, whatever the different things are, multiple stripes, it doesn't eliminate you from suffering. Because I can tell you, the higher I've gone in leadership, the more I've endured. And maybe not necessarily in the field, but just, you hear everything that's going on the higher you go, whether you want to or not. And with this particular individual, and just read a news article, obviously there's things that were going on domestically. He suffered from, it seems like me, some kind of mental wellness, because it said he tried to commit suicide. So when you hear that, given everything you're teaching, how does it cause you to do any kind of pivot to your audience, or does it just create such a stronger passion to reach out to these high level CEOs like chiefs and sheriffs to start implementing, not just for their employees, but for themselves?
Yeah, no, that's incredibly, tragic story. And I guess, there's no secret. Freddie Ramirez, director of Dade County, allegedly tried to take his life last night. And so, we're hopeful that he's going to survive through this. But yeah, I think that it should cause everyone in the profession to recognize that, first of all, for a long time, we in policing have had this almost, this like internal divide between supervision and rank and file. Like we've, for whatever reason over the years thought, well, the supervisors don't understand, and, it's us against them. And there's just kind of always been that piece that's existed. And I'm not going to get too far into why or whether it's warranted or not, but
Right.
what this horrible tragedy last night, I think, indicates more than anything is that, as it relates to the emotional health of our men and women, there is no one, and I mean no one, who is immune from it. It doesn't matter if you have 4 stars on your collar, like you said, or any stripes, or your slick sleeve. You are exposed to something that happens out there in our communities that is very often grief filled. It's very often tragic, and it's very often incredibly sad. And that's just, those are just 3 things that we don't talk about in policing, that we don't talk about how counterintuitive it is to make the decision, the noble decision, to become a police officer, to become a public servant, someone who's going to come out here and serve the community, potentially at the risk of your own life. Okay, so this is the starting ground for everyone, whether you got stars, stripes, or a slick sleeve. That's how this thing initiated, this journey. But what has happened is, when you're a giving, caring, servant-hearted person, and you are exposed frequently to a heavy dose of grief, tragedy, and sadness, right? Cumulatively, over the months, over the quarters, the years, cumulatively, just by proximity, you cannot help but be affected by it. And your responses are very easily going to be anger. It's going to be one of them. You're going to get upset and angry about all the carnage and all the ugliness that you're seeing. You're going to feel very uncomfortable about a lot of these scenes. You're not going to really know how to respond to it. We haven't really created a culture where you can just say, hey, man, that made me really sad, or that really sucks. We don't even do that. So we just kind of dismiss it. We pack it away real deep, hoping that somehow or another it will never manifest. And it always manifests. Or we do the other option, which is we drink, because drinking drowns that wailing, the sound of that wailing mother, or it, helps you forget some of the sights and some of the sounds and even some of the smells. And those are really the 3 responses we've had, and they're in our core in this police department. So regardless of how high you elevate in the ranks, or whether you take whatever route you take, investigative side or leadership side, those pieces still exist in there. And I think this tragedy last night really illustrates that. And there's none of us that are immune from this. And this is going to take all of us. This is going to take recruit classes We're going to have to talk to recruits about how we can better serve their emotional health, at least with what they know even prior to becoming a police. And then we're going to have to talk to new officers and frontline supervisors and senior officers and rank officers, because this is going to take a combined cumulative effort if we're really going to better protect our minds. Because let me tell you, man, policing is an incredibly noble profession, right? But so it's also incredibly noble to be the mother or father that you set out to be. It's also incredibly noble to be the husband or wife that you set out to be, or the son or daughter. That's noble too. And that's far more important than our ability to patrol. It's
Correct.
far more important than our ability to reduce crime. It's our personal lives that really matter. If those things aren't right, if our marriages aren't right, or we're not the parents that we want to be to our kids, or we're just not the person that we set out to be when we took this job, we ain't going to do anything for our community if we don't get those things right. And so, yeah, it does, obviously, just like think by the way I'm talking, I can tell it does elevate my passion to hear about what happened to Freddie. And
good.
And I think that, listen, I'm going to push this thing as long as I have a patch on my sleeve and 2 stars on my collar, and that people give me a platform to talk. I'm going to talk about it, man. And I'm going to tell the stuff that I've seen and the stuff that I've heard and the things I'm carrying. I don't care if someone says, man, Reuben, that doesn't sound like a bureau. That doesn't sound like a tactical and special ops bureau. It doesn't matter, man. It's more important I would rather compromise my reputation to be able to help another officer not consider taking their own life, and than any other type of accolade I might get. And I'll tell you, man, suicides, we've dialed in on suicides today, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
The statistics are startling, but man, suicides are just the tip of the iceberg.
Correct.
There is divorce, obviously, we hear these horrible statistics, 65-70% in the country, PTSD, depression, anxiety, alcoholism. I mean, those things are killing us, man. And so, yeah, we need to bring some attention to this in a big way. And I'm going to do everything I know I can. And I know you are too. And that's why I wanted to be on your show. And I appreciate all the stuff you're doing as well, man.
All right, no problem. I mean, it's like I said, Reuben, one of the things that I have learned is there's a lot of stress in law enforcement. And now, as we increase this talks, which I don't think there's ever enough, because obviously, once again, we just talked about Director Ramirez, and obviously he knows about wellness programs, especially in a large agency like that. But I do wonder, was he able to participate in some of the stuff? I sit back and think like, well, sometimes the higher we go, sometimes we say, oh, we don't have time to actually participate in the program. That's for the officers. But these programs aren't for officers as much as it is for the people. It's for the people that wear the uniform. They just happen to have the title of officer, sergeant, lieutenant, assistant chief, director, whatever it might be. But these programs are designed to enhance people's lives. And things like checkpoints and just speaking about it goes a far way. Like I said earlier on, I think that, and this is just me thinking, obviously I haven't done any homework and I don't know if I can forecast the future, but I can see in 5 to 10 years it being much more acceptable to say, hey man, this was really a bad call. Like I need to go talk to somebody, and to be consistent. Like right now, and I think even right now, if you go to, let's say, 100-man agency or 100 officer agency, you might get maybe this may be optimistic, maybe 10 people that will be willing to say that. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see 30 to 40% of that department at least saying, you know what, I learned about this 10 years ago. It's okay. You know what, I didn't know when my time was coming, because cumulatively I've been through a lot of things. So now that it's here, now I know, hey, we have outlets.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think the newer generation of policing, we give them a hard time a lot, but I tell you what, they are more receptive to this idea and this concept of protecting their emotional health than any other generation of policing I've seen. So yeah, I think you're right, man. I think if we message this right to our new workforce and really continue to send the message out now and do all that we can, I think in 5 years, hopefully this thing will look a lot different.
Yeah, and it will. And as we speak about how it's going to look different, there's actually, and we talked about this, there's actually state legislative that's actually supporting this. So how is that going?
Yeah, that was just another fantastic win for us here in Texas, and our RPD initiated a piece of legislation this year at the Texas legislature, House Bill 3858, that basically it incentivizes any police department, any agency in Texas that creates a proactive initiative like checkpoints that checks on officers when they go to those loss of life calls. The bill specifically says suicides, homicides, and fatality car crashes, the same thing our program does. And it says that for those agencies that do build a proactive initiative, they will be eligible for grant funding and reimbursement for the cost to build the program, as well as the cost for counseling and therapy services. So big time, opportunity here in Texas, I think, for us to get these agencies moving out of neutral or some sort of reactive emotional health support system and move into the a proactive and or a proactive program. So I'm hopeful that that this change starts us on that path of changing things. Here in Texas, looks good so far.
Yeah, and I think it will. And I say that with some evidence. As far as California did something very similar, they were able to get $50 million for their entire state, no matter if the agency applied for it or not. Every agency, whether it was a PD or a sheriff's office that employed what they call over their peace officers, they were all given money to mental wellness programs, whether it was supporting the current peer support units or getting fitness equipment, whatever it might be, to help increase that. So I think what you guys did as well in Dallas with House Bill 3858, I think is going to be able to result in the same type of activities, because that's kind of where it starts. It starts like somebody's going into law, and this time Congress or wherever it's at right now, they're saying, you know what, this is important. The people that are on these streets at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning while we sleep, they may have some stuff going on. So why don't we support it? So the fact that they're starting to get on board as well, that's a good sign, because that means that society is recognizing that, hey, if you want the police officer with the greatest mindset to come out there, he or she needs help as well.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mentioned something about the I don't know if we were in the green room or I did it when we were live, but talked about some of the research that's out there, and the academia world is writing a lot about the effects of policing. The medical psychology world has talked extensively about the effects of this job on policing. And while I appreciate the academia world and even the medical world that talking about the stressors of our job and the effects of our job, I also I get just a kind of a little bit just frustrated, I guess, with all of the research that comes out talking about the effects of this job, because I think if every police officer listening to this knows that this job is extremely stressful. There's a number of reasons why this is an extremely stressful profession, right? You and I know this. But at some point, we need to evolve from telling us how stressful the job is and creating awareness to actually taking action and doing something. And so one of the things I said in Austin when I was testifying was, even if you look at PTSD, for example, there's recently been legislation passed all over the country that talks about the post-traumatic stress of being a police officer. But the problem is that we don't want to index too hard on requiring some sort of like critical incident, some sort of massive incident, because when you do that, when you say that, well, what if Michael has PTSD, I've got to know the incident that he was tied to in order to be able to diagnose him with PTSD or to make him eligible for some sort of PTSD benefits. That's the wrong approach, because like we've just highlighted, it is the routine calls out, quote unquote, routine calls cumulatively that are really affecting our men and women. the crisis, the officer involved shooting, or God forbid one of us get killed out here, or the violent death of a child, those things are critical. Those are going to tailspin anyone.
Yep.
But you don't need those types of incidents to develop post-traumatic stress. So my point in telling you this is that we as law enforcement need to get involved in this thing. We need to quit sitting back, waiting for the academia world, waiting for the medical world, or waiting for legislators to give us something. That's probably the part that bothers me the most, is we don't need to sit back waiting for someone else to tell us how to better serve us or how we can be better protected. This is our job. And this is what I want everyone who's listening to this podcast to know, is that this is our job. We are the only ones who are going to fix this. We can't sit back and wait for somebody to legislate our way out of, or our way to an emotionally healthier life. Nobody's going to legislate our way to being the parents that we wanted to be to our kids, or the husbands or wives that we wanted to be. This is our job, and we can do it. We just need to get off our ass and quit thinking that somebody else is going to do it for us, or that we're too tough to come forward and just tell the absolute truth. I'm not asking anybody anymore to be, I'm not asking you necessarily to, spill your heart to me, but I'm asking you to be honest. Let's just be perfectly honest. Those calls that we go to, yeah, they suck. They make us uncomfortable. We don't know how to feel about it. That's perfectly normal and human. And it's healing to be just normal and human about it. We've buried the human part of this job for so long that it's no wonder we're sitting there, getting our tails handed to us in the emotion with the stigmas. And so all we really need to do is just be honest, just be 100% truthful. There's no weakness in it. The person next to us their life might depend on it. Mm-hmm. And that makes it worth it. So that's all we're really trying to push here, is just, even now, like even today, the majority of states that will hear this, they have probably recently, and I mean recently, like within the past year or two, passed some sort of legislation that says, you may become eligible for some sort of, benefits if you are diagnosed with PTSD, but they are requiring a critical incident. And so what they need to know is that PTSD is not a product of a critical incident every single time. It very well may be the product of the cumulative effect of the routine calls. So let's us start telling them what it is, because they clearly don't know.
Yeah, shoot. 20 years of anything that's high stress, I think I believe it catches up with everybody in one form or another, whether it's depression, alcoholism, divorce, just feeling horrible. I mean, obviously worst case scenario is suicide, but I think that as we address it more, it won't be seen as a weakness, but we do have to change the narrative. I think that's one of the most important things to do, is to increase that side of our knowledge. And, to be completely transparent, I know something that you and I talked about in the beginning when we first met was, how well do we think people are going to receive stuff like this? And I remember me telling you, like, hey, the transition is already here. So the foundation of what things like checkpoints and just creating any kind of wellness program, even with state legislative, it's growing. And I think that's one of the most important things, and most things that I'm excited to see. I mean, I can hear it in your voice all the time, Reuben, every time you talk about whatever we mention that's about these programs. And I do believe going forward, it will increase. How do you think these kind of programs impact family life?
Well, I can tell you ours, for example, our checkpoint model is designed to, when we check on the officer and we tell them, hey, we got resources, we got counselors, and we got money to pay for it. Those resources and the money for the counselors are available to our officers and their family members. So one of the ruses that I use and I have people use is, hey, listen, if you like, for example, if I reach out to you, Michael, and you don't seem like you're receptive to it, I'll say something, or we'll say something like, hey, listen, Michael, I know you're at that, you were at that suicide the other day. Those calls can be tough. And you say, yeah, I'm fine, man. I don't need it. Our response might be something like, well, listen, man, you may not need it, but the counselors, the money that we have for it, man, it's available to your wife and kids too. And sometimes, this job is it's harder on our spouses than we think, or it's harder on our kids. They see that stuff on the news. So, if nothing else, man, use that money or use those counselors for your kid. It doesn't have to be police related. It can be marriage, it can be alcohol, it can be school, it can be anything. And so what we believe is that as long as anyone in your network of support is being supported, like your wife or your kids, that's going to make you just a little bit. It's going to take a little bit of those, proverbial bricks out of your pack, and so out of your backpack. So we're supporting everything. We're our money and the program, the counselors and the money goes to spouses, husbands, whomever, significant others, children. That's our effort to try to support the family. So yeah, I absolutely think that it has an effect, on the family as well.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it's everything's a whole picture. I know I've used to be the person that tried to say this. Oh, I'm not bringing that to work, or I'm not taking that home, and it's our brain is not a switch. I always find it fun to hear people say, "Oh, I don't take that stuff home." I'm like, really? Are you? I was like, do you just have this magical brain that could just have an on and off switch? I said the fact that you're saying it, then that goes a far way as well. I mean, I was like, the fact that you think that you could hide from it, to me, that's a problem in itself.
Yeah.
So it's definitely one of those things that I see that is big, being able to like, hey, you know what? This fact that you offer it to the family, I think you're going to get even more buy-in, because people are like, hey, you know what? You're not helping me. You're helping my kids. You're helping my spouse. You're helping whoever in the family build from there. So yeah, so that's good that you guys definitely incorporated that into the program.
Yeah.
Where do you see do you see any obstacles with programs like this? Not financially, and not maybe something out of the ordinary that you've run into that you're like, oh man, I didn't see this kind of obstacle coming since the program's been live.
As far as the program, I mean, I get so many testimonials from officers, at our wellness unit email, just saying how grateful they are and they appreciate this, well needed, and stuff like that. So I haven't really seen any obstacles. I'll tell you where I think the obstacles are. When we look at implementation in other agencies, I think there's several things that occur. Having presented this at throughout the country over the last 12 months, I think every police department unanimously believes and agrees that there's something there's more needed in wellness. But I think the majority of police departments don't really know what to do about it. I think that's one of the problems. I think the default has been, if we believe that something's needed and we don't know what to do about it, I think the default has been to purchase something, like either I don't know, hire a counselor or bring in a doctor on staff, or maybe even buy a piece of technology like one of those wellness apps those things are all over the place, and so I think those are all good, but I think if you haven't tilled the earth, so to speak, or tilled the ground in your police department, like a checkpoint program, like making the department receptive to the idea of wellness and the need for wellness, and using influential leaders to get them to buy in and understand, then I think anything that a police department buys is going to be very, short-lived, or it's not going to have get a lot of miles on it. And then I think the other obstacle is that there are still police chiefs in this country, and sheriffs and leaders that really don't know that this is necessary. I think there's some that are kind of on the fence about it. And so if you're on the fence about it, then you are not going to have the drive or the passion or the willingness to make big changes. And so I don't know, as far as obstacles, those are the things that I see. I just I think that we're going to have to almost like have a movement, like in policing. Like, that's why I really believe that it's us that has to do this. And it's going to be our officers internally through agencies throughout the country that are going to have to put their foot down and say, hey, listen, I'm not saying I'm weak, and I'm not trying to be the one going up against the grain here, but we need something here, if nothing else, for our family. Like, people are going to have to say that. They're going to have to almost demand that it gets done, whether it's through their associations, through their unions, or I don't know, through their supervision. But we're gonna have to take a stand for this thing and just say we got to do something, because what we've done up to this point is not enough. We've got all the statistics and stigmas and every other ugly documentation to prove that what we're doing right now isn't working. And so anyway, yeah, that was a long way to say that you're just outside of the real buy-in or the real understanding of what to do, or the initiative and drive to do it. I don't really see any other obstacles. Those are the main ones that I've seen.
Yeah, and it's all true. I mean, if this wasn't a problem, we wouldn't still have this issue. We wouldn't, like you said earlier, we wouldn't be leading the country in suicides when it comes to industries. If it wasn't real, we wouldn't have a high-ranking official of a police department trying to commit suicide if mental wellness wasn't a real thing. However, it's going to take that, obviously, financial buy-in of some sort. It's going to take that knowledge, and I think you explained it the best. I think some of the older leaders that may not have grown up and been raised around this kind of concept, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to kind of pick it up, which is understandable. That's all of us. Like, if all of a sudden I just say, hey, I'm gonna go play NFL football, it's not going to be that easy. No matter how much I'm trained, like, it's going to take me time to realize it. But it is a movement, and I think that the current generation and the future generation is seeing it, and they're understanding the importance early on, which is good. Once again, I'm going to give a shout out to California. One thing that they told me when I was talking to them about the wellness program, just different agencies, was they actually, I don't know if it was fully pushed through the legislative or if it's part of their state certification, but they're going to have, I think, either an hour or a day that's required in all their academy classes going forward on mental wellness in particular. So I know before, I don't think I got anything. I was in 3 different academies. I don't know, Reuben, I don't know if you remember getting any kind of like mental wealth class, like actual for you kind of thing, versus when you respond to people that have mental wellness issues. I remember getting those classes, but nothing like, hey, take care of yourself. So I think that's another step as far as knowledge goes. Like, hey, we're going to add this course now to academy, so we get that focus there. So I think you're right. A lot of the obstacles is just the knowledge side of it. I think as we overcome that, we will see growth.
Yeah, I think so too. And the training part is one of the things that, like, having dealt with the state legislature this year, you hear a lot about training, and that we've got to have resilience training, and we've got to have these different types of trainings. And I think while there's value in us obviously having awareness in our academies, and there's also a piece there that we've got to also recognize that resilience, for example, it's hard to train resilience. I mean, you don't sometimes we think that if you go through a 4-hour or an 8-hour class, or even that now all of a sudden you're resilient, because you got a download or something. And but resilience works on more of a moving scale, right? Like, your ability to be resilient is very often impacted by what's going on in your personal life. I can be considered, I guess, resilient, and then if I go through a divorce, man, I'm not resilient during that time at all. I mean, I'm struggling. If you have a you have a sick child, or someone in your family is ill, your ability to be resilient is affected. And then, God forbid, you have a loss of in the family or something like that. So resilience works on more of like a moving scale, as opposed to a training block that you can just consume and somehow be resilient. And so I think that what I'd like to see is us as police departments and police leaders and throughout the country, just kind of recognize that human piece of this. Like, if we just prepare our cops, Like if anybody had ever prepared us and said, hey, Michael, here's the thing, man. I'm glad you're here. Glad you made it to police academy. One of the hardest parts of your job is going to be the, sadness. Is you're going to see a lot of people in sad situations, and you're going to be, you're going to be prone to try to dismiss it and be uncomfortable about it, and you're going to try to bury it, and that's not going to benefit you, Michael. Like I'd like that. That to me, that would be better. And then if they said, and as a result, we're going to, we think every police officer in America should have a counselor, and we have counselors on the department. But if you don't want to feel comfortable coming to internal docs because you think that we might hold it against you, we're going to give you, we're going to let you go to a counselor of your choice, externally, and we're going to pay for it, because that's how important of a resource you are to us. Like that would have, that's better than any, 8-hour, 40-hour block of resilience right there. But we haven't ever thought about, like, innovative about what the real truth is about this job, how it will make us feel, what we will very likely do when we feel uncomfortable, which is bury it, drink it, or get angry at it. And cumulatively, it will destroy us. All the things we love, we will almost unanimously have zero chance of having peace in our life when we take on this job. But there's ways to mitigate it, and here are the ways to mitigate it. Like, I would have rather that. Like, that's a better approach. I'll take that approach all day. I'll tell you, man, I got a 14-year-old son, and I am scared to death that my son is going to tell me one day, Dad, I want to be a police officer. And that is coming from a man who has had nothing but success in his police career. I became a cop when I was 22 years old, and I've had every role that I've really, wanted in the PD. I've had every promotion I've wanted, and the fact that I'm scared to death that my son is going to come into police or want to that's telling, right? And I'm not mad at policing. I'm not, man. I want to help this profession as much as I can, but we have got to do better, man. We've got to do, and the way we get better is not by teaching. Like, I wouldn't want my kid to say, give him a 8-hour block of resilience training or a 4-hour block and somehow think he's going to be safe. I'd rather they do that other approach, and let's just be really real about this job for a change. Let's just be really, really human about this job for a change. And I think we would be all better served if we just do that.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, it's realistic, and I think your fear of him entering in this industry isn't uncommon. And we know, and it's because you know everything that comes with it. And I don't think any parent wants to see their kid go through the same type of, specifically as it relates to the show, mental anguish that you face. I mean, while we love what we do, it's still like, man, I don't want him to have to go through that. You know what I mean? And so it's not uncommon, and everybody definitely has their different viewpoints on it, but it's definitely something that isn't easy. And obviously the goal is to make it better just in case that he does decide to do it after all. I mean, you want to make sure you've done everything you can from where Reuben Ramirez has been through his life to kind of lay a foundation somewhere. So it is tough, man. And it is hard to not try to make people better and realize what's ahead, because the last thing we want to do is give them 8 hours and say, okay, you're good for the next 20 years. Because you're right. That doesn't work. 8 hours is something that's a good start. I mean, it's a good idea to kind of introduce a program, but you do have to have that continuous push, just like with firearms. We don't just shoot once in our career and say, okay, now we can shoot for the next 20 years. We continuously shoot to qualify and make sure our skills are still up to par. It should be the same thing with things like resilience, mental wellness. And I could see, once again, 5 to 10 years, I can see that being part of in-service training, annual training, whatever people want to call it at their department, because it's going to be something that we'll realize that's going to make better officers, better people for the community. And I think that's what it's ultimately about, make sure that we have given people the right tools to succeed in their personal life and their professional life.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree, man. I totally agree.
Yeah, and as we're getting deep into this, and I don't want to get in too much deeper because, we could probably talk about this for several hours. I mean, you do presentation on it for hours, so do I. I do want to make sure that we respect not just your time, but the people listening. If somebody wanted to hear more about this and they wanted to either bring you out to speak, or they wanted to implement this checkpoints program, or they just wanted to get someone that's just been through life, how would they reach you?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Michael. One of the things that we do when I present this out, I always offer to, if anything that I've mentioned resonates and they believe that it's something their department could benefit from, or they want to hear more, that they're welcome to reach out to our wellness unit or myself directly, and that we would be willing to, share the policies that we've written and just kind of some of the templates on the program, anything to give them a little head start. I'll give out, well, two email addresses for one. If something regarding the wellness unit, the template, the checkpoint model, and the other things I've mentioned, they can reach us at dpdwellness@dallaspolice.gov. You're welcome to reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to talk more about this with anyone. And again, this is similar to you, man. This is something that I want to continue to push this narrative out as much, as often, as best we can. And you can reach me at Reuben.Ramirez@dallaspolice.gov, and it's REUBEN.Ramirez, RAMIREZ @dallaspolice.gov. Be happy to share or expand on anything else that we've talked about today.
And for those that are listening, keep in mind that one day Reuben will retire. And I know one of the platforms he uses, that's how we met. If you're looking to reach him after he leaves Dallas, let's say you listen to this show and it's 3 years later, go find him on LinkedIn at the name he gave you, Reuben Ramirez, and the spelling will be in the show notes. Because with a guy like Reuben, the passion doesn't stop here. It's not going to stop when he can't or chooses to retire. It's going to be something that he progresses and continues to grow. So that's one of the things that I love about having people on the show, especially ones that are passionate about building law enforcement. I know that it's not going to just stop when they leave their agency. I know it's something that's going to be a continuous push, because they don't just have the passion, they also have the calling to serve the public and their peers. So we definitely appreciate that, Reuben. Any final words for the audience?
No, just listen. The fact that they're listening to this show, proves that they know there's something bigger that needs to be done. And I know sometimes I get a little, harsh on, whether it's the medical world or the academia world, but I'm appreciative of everything that's been done to kind of create the awareness. But I do believe that if this thing is going to get fixed, if this thing is going to get to a healthier place, a better place, a safer place for our men and women, it's going to start with us, man. I mean, it's us, and this is our call to action. So keep doing what you're doing, keep listening, keep learning, and hopefully something resonates. Hopefully you make the right contact, reach out, make that connection. Like Michael said, this is our calling. This is far beyond anything that you and I and others I know probably originally thought that we'd be doing. But we're here for a reason, and I think the listeners are too. So yeah, let's get together, connect, and get this thing done.
Reuben, I could definitely tell you I never thought I would be doing this, even growing up, high school, college, even early years of my law enforcement. I never knew I'd have a podcast. I never knew I'd be speaking, especially not on mental wellness. It just wasn't something. However, we all evolve, we all transform, and this is ways that now I've learned that benefits me, obviously, in a sense of me learning. I mean, the more you speak, the more you learn, because you have to know what you're talking about, but also that's benefiting others. So I think what you're doing is extremely noble, and it's definitely a benefit to our industry. I just want to say a quick thanks to, no problem at all. I just want to say a quick thanks to everybody that's listening. If you haven't had a chance, make sure you look into the call notes, reach out to Reuben, whether it's through his email or like him and follow him on LinkedIn. Do something, guys, because this program that I have been seeing evolve over the last couple of months in my short time knowing Reuben, I can see it benefiting any agency of any size that doesn't have any program in place. And even if you do, add this to your repertoire. But at the end of the day, mental wellness is important. And one of the goals of this show is to show that although we wear uniforms, no matter what uniform color you wear or what city you live in, we're people. And that's the most important part. And we all can benefit from helping each other and helping ourselves. Thank you all for listening to this show, and I hope you guys have an amazing day.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge, The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler. On Twitter at Michael A. Laidler. On Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.